From Justin Gaethje fighting Dustin Poirier for the second time, to Tony Ferguson's first fight since UFC 279, these are some reasons why UFC 291 will make history. So let's start with the title match, Gaethje versus Poirier. Because part 2 of this rivalry is happening after more than 5 years. Surely, it had to happen in its own time, but the main reason is actually something else. After Jorge Masvidal decided to retire, he hung his gloves, leaving a void at the top. Obviously, the top brass had to get on with it. And who better fight for the BMF title other than these two? Gaethje might be one of the greatest threats to lightweight fighters, but does Poirier really care? I mean, he does have the upper hand in this fight. Despite losing more matches than his opponent, he's the guy who put Gaethje down the last time they met. In fact, his confidence is through the roof, once again. Now everyone knows just how violent Gaethje gets in the ring, but Poirier thinks that he performs at his best with a challenge like that. Of course, Gaethje has improved even more since his last fight with Rafael Fiziev, and even Poirier acknowledges that fact. Though he still sees him as the same fighter that he put to rest 5 years ago, the same car crash fighter, now with a seatbelt on. After all, the rankings do matter too. And for now, Gaethje stands at number 3, just one ranking below Poirier. Safe to say that it's one of the most anticipated matches of this year, and it makes sense that it's the title match. But that's not all. How about throwing Alex Pereira into the mix? First of all, the way that Alex is ready to step back into the ring just screams confidence, especially after getting knocked out by Israel Adesanya in April 2023. Not just that, but his new opponent, Jan Blachowicz, is determined to push for the light heavyweight title. Oh, and get this, he's not just confident in defeating Alex, but hopes to send him back to the middleweight division. Though Alex made that decision after his defeat against Adesanya, and going back would mean facing him once again. So maybe that's not something he wants at the moment. Jan Blachowicz, on the other hand, believes that fighters who move up in weight usually struggle with timing, speed, and many other factors. So he said that it was his duty to send these out-of-place fighters back to their original weight classes. Clearly, confidence is written all over Jan Blachowicz. Not just that, the Polish fighter is also frustrated with the result of his last fight, an underwhelming draw with Magomed Ankalaev. Here's the thing though, he's won 6 of the last 7 matches he's fought. So it's obviously annoying to see a draw in there. But hey, if he wins this fight, he is probably going to get rewarded with a title shot, so things aren't that bad. Although obviously if Pereira wins, he too will get a title shot against Jamal Hill, who's the current light heavyweight champion. Along with the rest of the card though, Dana White also announced the bout between Ikram Aliskerov and Paulo Costa. And even though this one might be a little low on the numbers game, it's still a pretty exciting match. Ikram Aliskerov, with a record of 14-1 in MMA and 1-0 in the UFC, is set to make a significant leap in the middleweight division. Yeah, it does look like a match between rookies until you see the opponent. Clearly Costa's not a newbie. He's been fighting for years. And with an impressive record of 14-2, the only man who's in trouble is Aliskerov. In fact, this being his second match in the UFC, it's quite surprising that he's got to face such a highly ranked contender. But if it means anything, Aliskerov showcased his skills in his previous fight by securing a first-round knockout victory over Phil Hawes. That said, he does have a background in combat sambo, and with his only career loss coming against Khamzat Chimaev, it seems like it doesn't matter how old or new someone is in the UFC. I mean, once you're inside the octagon, it doesn't matter if your opponent's Ikram or Costa. Speaking of Costa though, he last fought at UFC 278 and defeated Luke Rockhold. It is safe to say that both fighters are coming from a place of immense confidence, though Costa clearly has the upper hand. In fact, the UFC initially announced a bout between him and Robert Whittaker. But Costa claims that he never agreed to the fight because of what he was getting paid. Now, we've discussed one Pereira, but allow me to introduce the second one. It's Mikael Pereira, who's gonna fight Stephen Thompson. This one's special. Why? Because the match came back from the dead. It was originally scheduled for the UFC 289 event, but since no contracts were sent to the fighters, nothing materialized. Not just that, we didn't get any reason for why it was abandoned either. In fact, the event went through some other changes as well. Simply put, it was a mess. Thankfully though, the disappointed fans won't have to stay that way. In fact, the same welterweight bout will now happen, just a month later at UFC 291. But now it doesn't hold the same level of anticipation as it did at 289, especially because of the other high-value matches on the cards. Having said that, it's still going to be a pretty great match, both for old and new fans. One reason is how charged the two fighters are. Thompson recently returned to the win column with an entertaining victory over Kevin Holland. Pereira, on the other hand, has won 5 consecutive fights to enter the rankings. But given that he's also lost a couple of matches, it's understandable why not everyone is excited for him. In fact, when Thompson announced his fight on Twitter, one user, named Casualty War, asked who his manager was, in an attempt to address how he's been fighting the wrong people, one after another. Speaking of Kevin Holland, though, he's also on the card, fighting Michael Chiesa. I told you, it's one of the most interesting cards in UFC history. Not just because of such high-profile fighters, but because they've been able to cram them all onto one card. Thankfully, there are no contract issues that have come out, at least till now. Even with the Holland and Chiesa matchup, it was already rumored that something of that sort is coming up. And then, when the Bossman White confirms it himself, there's no denying that it will most likely go through. Coming back to the fighters though, it doesn't look good for Chiesa. The guy's aiming to break out of a losing streak, one that started with Vicente Luque and Sean Brady helped take it forward. He was actually scheduled to fight at UFC 287, but then Li Jingliang, his opponent, withdrew, and he had to sit it out. But it's worth mentioning that prior to his recent losses, Chiesa had won 4 consecutive fights. So not all is lost, but it's also clear where the confidence might lie in this bout, because Holland, who recently fought at UFC 287, secured a third-round knockout victory over Santiago Ponzinibbio. This, even after the fact that he was restricted by his right-hand movement. It wasn't before losing to Stephen Thompson and Khamzat Chimaev that he got there, though, so no matter what the result, it's going to be interesting to see the two fight it out. And for the last entry, something that the fans have been concerned about, it's Tony Ferguson fighting Bobby Green. It's sad to say, but it might be time for Ferguson to hang up his gloves, and that's why 291 is so important. The 39-year-old hasn't looked great for a while now, both in the octagon and outside of it. Putting aside his awful 5-loss streak, which by the way is yet to be broken, he just got out of a serious car accident while also being drunk. He's been charged with a DUI, but then he landed himself in more trouble by refusing to take the field sobriety test. Clearly, he's not okay, and that's what concerns fans. Some of them believe Ferguson is in no shape to fight, while others predict a loss for Ferguson. At the very least, they hope that he'd retire after the fight. One even went a step further to liken Ferguson's situation to fighter's abuse, drawing a comparison to BJ Penn's career. Even the fans who are rooting for him aren't sure about his performance. But here's the thing, what if he wins? That'll be a comeback. Not to forget, Ferguson's one of the most ferocious fighters in the lightweight division. But it won't be easy to defeat his opponent. Apart from having the age advantage, he also has a better 5-match record, though he's been winless for the last 3 fights. The point is, no matter what happens, UFC 291 is going to be an extremely important event for Tony. So there you have it. From Tony Ferguson's first fight since UFC 279 to Justin Gaethje fighting Dustin Poirier for the second time. Those were some reasons why UFC 291 will make history.